Hello, and welcome to the American Single Malt Whiskey Roundtable. We're going to spend some time talking and tasting through American Single Malts brought by all of the panelists here, as well as friends from around the country. My name is Caitlin Bartlemay, and I'll be both your host and a panelist today. I'm the master distiller at Clear Creek Distillery. Oh, come on. There we go. Master distiller, Clear Creek Distillery, home of McCarthy's Single Malt Whiskey. With 14 years of industry experience and a food science degree, I love teaching people about why the spirits in their glass are worth celebrating. We also have, boy, it is touchy if I have it in the wrong hand. Here we go, Daniel Stewart, who is the head distiller at Ology in Tallahassee, Florida. He's been distilling American Single Malt for 6 years, and as a spirits writer, he's been focusing on craft distilling and writing on topics from cask selection and independent bottling all the way to grain choices. We also have Gabriel RiCharde. He's the blending manager for Balcones Distilling in Waco, Texas. Starting out his career as a geochemist, Gabriel has spent the last 7 years with Balcones blazing the trail for American Single Malt Whiskey. And finally, Jay Erisman is the co-founder and vice president of New Riff Distilling in Newport, Kentucky. 23 years in the business has seen him in many roles across the industry, from launching the spirits program at the Party Source and writing for Whiskey Advocate, to current 4-string truck driver at New Riff, along with his other vice presidential duties. We'll dig into the definitions of the category soon, but I'll not be an evil mastermind and keep you any longer before you get to try your first American Single Malt. On the top left-hand corner of your tasting mat, we have a single malt from Atelier V, who is a distiller here in New Orleans. When in doubt, pick somebody from the home team, right? Distilled and aged here in New Orleans, owner and distiller Jed Haas has specifically picked a myriad of malted barleys to sculpt and curate the complex flavor of this whiskey. First released in April of 2018, this single malt is aged in both new and used American oak casks, all in small format. With a tasting room here in New Orleans that not only features this 3-year American single malt, as well as the 5-year, he also has award-winning drams like Louisiana Rice Whiskey, the Riz, also his Euphrazine Gin, and Toulouse Green and Red Absinthe, all made with estate-grown wormwood. So while you're here in town, I encourage you to reach out to Jed and go and stop by his tasting room and try all of his award-winning spirits. All right, in a world where we can't even decide on how to spell the word whiskey, there are at least a few things that we're able to agree on. Single malt on the global level is made with 100% malted barley. It's made in the country it says it's from, and it's aged in a wooden container for some time. That's all we can agree on so far. We're working on it. Oops, I hit the wrong button. Hey-oh, crushing it. As with most things, the history behind how we got here goes back further than one might expect. We're going to go all the way back to 1200 BC in Babylonian Mesopotamia, which I realize is an awful long ways away, and I don't want you looking at your watches wondering how long I'm going to keep you from your next sample, but I promise we're going to keep it really pithy, right? The first time that distilling and the equipment used to distill shows up in history is it's written by a woman named Taputi. That's not actually her name, that's just her title. Her name has been lost to the sands of time, but distilling has been used to make wonderful and beautiful things for a very long time. The first written record of whiskey is in 1405 in Ireland. Oh, whoops, I missed my joke. Thousands of years happen, right? So excited to tell you about the fact that whiskey starts in Ireland. I missed my joke. Thousands of years after Taputi and her perfuming, a bunch of stuff happened. I'm sure it's very important, but we'll talk about it in another show. Now we're in Ireland in 1405, where the first written record of whiskey appears in the annals of Clan MacNoise, where they state the head of the clan has died after taking a surfeit of aquavita. So, like I said, humans have always been into alcohol. 89 years later, we find confirmation that whiskey's production in Scotland is well underway, with a note from King James IV granting malt to monasteries specifically for the production of aquavita. Just as the style of jeans shift from skinny to jinkos, so too do ideologies of leadership and production change over time. In 1536, King Henry VIII dissolves the monasteries, leaving legions of monks with nothing to do. And you know what they say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. In the 15 and 1600s, the dawn of European exploration, where they were traveling to the New World, bringing their ideas, their traditions, and most importantly, their whiskey. We enter more familiar territory now with the U.S. federal prohibition from 1920 to 1933. Few distilleries last this 13-year period, and in 1980, there are less than 100 distilleries in the United States. In 1982, the dawn of craft distilling begins when Hubert opens Germain Robin in California. 16 years later, the first American single malt is released in Oregon. And by 2023, there are over 2,000 distilleries in the United States. When the subject of single malt comes up, most minds do drift to Scotland, and that makes sense. They're essentially the cradle of life when it comes to single malt and whiskey production. But it's important to note that it's a global category. There are over 900 single malt producing distilleries across 41 countries that span the globe. Out of these 41 countries, 21 of them have formally recognized regulations for its production, and 5 are currently working on ratifying their regulations, which is where the United States currently sits. This graph shows the global producers in comparison to the top 5 countries with producing distilleries. You'll notice that there are over 250 American single malt producing distilleries, and that number is changing on an almost daily basis. In light of that number, it feels like a disservice to say that American single malt is a burgeoning category, but it really is. Right now, American single malt sits on the verge of being the first recognized new category of spirits in a very long time in the United States, and that's due to the hard work of the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. Comprised of over 100 spirits single malt producers and founded by 9 of them in 2016. The goal of the commission was to outline the basic tenets of the category so that consumers and trade could work together on education and promotion. In 2022, years of work saw the TTB officially open a comment period on the proposal to add American single malt whiskey to the standards of identity for distilled spirits in the U.S. The rules as proposed and presented by the commission are made from 100% malted barley, distilled entirely at one distillery, mashed, distilled, and aged in the United States, matured in oak casks not exceeding 700 liters, distilled to no more than 160 proof, and bottled no lower than 80 proof. These rules were carefully considered and weighed between the commission member producers in order to promote creativity within the category without alienating us from the global community. Considerations were also made for the scale of production, whether it's large or small, as well as embracing the rich and varied climate across the United States. American Single Malt has a bright future, and we are excited to share more details about why we are so passionate about it. And now, your next sample.
That's me.
That's you.
This on? Should I talk this?
Yeah.
So, my name's Daniel. I started distilling with Gabe at Balcones a while ago, and then moved to Florida, and basically starting from scratch with the single malt program there. And I was kind of influenced by 2 things. One, I wanted to make the kind of whiskey that I like to drink, and I tend to be drawn to more delicate, fruity single malts. That's my preference. And I also kind of thought about Florida regional aspect, what would a single malt from Florida look like, and I was kind of wanted to be influenced by something a bit more floral, light, good for hot, humid areas. So to that end, some of the production decisions, we do long fermentations, usually at least 10 days. We use ale yeast and also get kind of a secondary fermentation with lactobacillus. And we also go into used bourbon casks and used rum casks. This one that you have here, we haven't released it yet. We're still kind of trudging along, letting this age. So this is about 2 years old. And it's a blend of some rum casks and bourbon casks. So that's mine, yeah.
Awesome. All right, now we'll move on to our first question for the panel. What makes this American Single Malt so special?
I mean, I would say looking right here at what you had before you, there's an incredible variety, a ton of creativity. Yeah, I mean, right here, there's what, 4 kinds of oak, I think, represented, and very different production methods. So you have a lot of variety, and that's really exciting things. People are experimenting. I've talked to Scotch people for a long time who say, they're jealous of the kind of creativity going on with American Single Malt, the casks and everything that people are choosing to do.
They should be jealous.
They are, yeah, they are.
Here, I'll jump in. Are we supposed to put this close to our mouth? I feel like we were told to do that. Wow, ooh,
Oh,
booming.
there you go.
Wow.
There he is.
Sorry. I echo a little bit what Daniel says in the fact that as you kind of treating, at Balcones, we treat whiskey as like an extension of an artistic expression. This is the medium that we've chosen. We don't really see it as engineers or manufacturers. We try to come to it as artists. So it kind of, as we change, it changes, and as it changes us back. But I think ASM is kind of like a shared canvas and a shared art form. And so, what you do when you go to another producer, like New Riff or maybe a World Single Malt producer, because you have this shared medium, you can go, oh, I really love what they did with their brush strokes. I really love how they used their oils. I wouldn't have thought of that. I really love how they, the canvas that they selected, whatever. I think having that shared medium is nice, and there's a benefit there too. But there's also, you have these traditions like cognac or Armagnac or bourbon. You can't really make bourbon anywhere else. There's no comparison. It just is what it is, and it's just a different choice doing something that's so widespread and such a shared medium. So that's why I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. We are putting this framework, thanks to the TTB, someday we hope, around American Single Malt, and yet there's every bit of width of possibility of creative expression. Far more than, I literally mean it, they should be a little jealous. When people in Scotland come up with a new idea, they often get their hand slapped by the Scotch Malt Whiskey Association, and they can't put rye in Scotch, for example. And I don't mean to disparage single malt Scotch at all. I adore it, and it's a huge inspiration behind our whiskey. But we have the sky no limit here in America. And I wonder if it could prove a little challenging around the world when someone comes to American Single Malt, well, what is it? And even here, there's a tremendous breadth of character. But I think whiskey lovers will respond to that there can be any number of styles and creative minds at work in American Single Malt.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing for me is the potential for provenance within the category, right? When you're talking about things like Del Bach in Arizona using mesquite smoke as part of their malting process, that is developing a flavor within that whiskey that is specific to that region. And while our whiskey is made from peated malt from Scotland, we're using the fact that we're a brandy distillery to put our own fingerprints on what that single malt is actually going to taste like. And so the idea that each individual distillery and each region has the opportunity to develop this provenance within the category while still being part of what is a global community is something that makes this really special. And again, it's the harmony between creativity and history, right? The harmony between art and science. It's all there and all comes together with American Single Malt. All right, Gabe, you're up.
Oh, whoops. Okay, so I made too many slides. I think I have 3 slides, but I did want to start by saying first, show of hands, who's had American Single Malt before? Okay, cool. Wow, someone over there, first time. Way to go. I'm glad you're here. Who's had Balcones before? Anyone familiar with Balcones? Okay, a couple of you.
Look at you.
Okay, great, cool. Just wanted to see. This guy's made a bit of it. So yeah, Balcones was founded in 2008. We've always been in Waco, Texas, and Central Texas. We produced the first whiskey in Texas since Prohibition, corn whiskey called Baby Blue, and we released our first single malt back in 2010. We originally were inspired by single malt producers in the old world and wanted to get into the making of single malts. What else is up there? We released another single malt. So our core portfolio is Texas One Single Malt in 2010, and we released another one called Lineage in 2020. Just a few distillery shots just to give you all some context. So we inherited a copper mash tun from Speyburn in Speyside, and we installed our own sparge ring on there. We're unique in that we're kind of in keeping with tradition and drawing from tradition, but trying to find our own voice and speak from where our own voice comes from and try and, identify that. So I have to adapt the process to our intense climate and the intense heat and the intense variability in our climate. So we have some of the tallest pot stills in the world, a dramatic helical line arm to increase reflux and copper contact and brighten up the spirit in what would be a difficult climate to distill in pot distillation. And then over the years, we've also adjusted our maturation conditions. So we started in small barrels, really rapid evaporation, 25% loss per year, and have slowly moved up. We're in our 500-liter barrels, we're getting 4.25% of vapor loss a year to slow things down, dial on our process, and try to listen to Texas and listen to the climate, the component of the climate in our whiskey making. So the whiskey before you is live oak. On the next slide here. So we make a lot of whiskeys, some single grain whiskeys, corn rye, a smoked corn whiskey called Brimstone. There's Lineage and Texas One Single Malt, as well as some LTOs. The one before you, I probably should have been Lineage, a lot more cocktail friendly given where we are. But I decided to bring a visitor center exclusive that we just did in honor of our 15 years producing. This is 6-year-old, 100% Texas grown and malted barley, actually from the first harvest of malting grade barley within the state of Texas ever, a barley variety called Conlin. And it's matured entirely in virgin live oak casks that we harvested them, had them quarter sawn, aged the staves on the roof of our building for 3 years, and had ISC make us some barrels out of them. So it's a marry of the virgin oak, the virgin use of those casks, and then the second and third use of those casks. We kind of co-mingle a lot of whiskeys, Texas single malt whiskeys through there. So it's very, very distinct, a capture, snapshot of Texas and the climate and the oak from there. So I hope you all enjoy it. It's 57% ABV. It's a little stiff, but it's a fun one.
All right, here's a big one. What's your biggest challenge as an American single malt producer?
I'll start. I would say getting the public, getting consumers, and the industry to know what that means, and that it is a thing. I see in very large, very successful stores sometimes, single malts, American single malts are on a shelf altogether, but nothing to indicate that they're there. I also see other stores with a banner that says American single malt. Yes. That's lifting some awareness, and there's a lot of work to be done in that. So I think that's important.
I think I would say that the biggest challenge for the industry as a whole, not necessarily me personally, is kind of related to the strength of the category. There is a huge variety within American single malt, and that can be challenging to talk to consumers about and explain that variety. If you get a bourbon, obviously there's variety within bourbon, but you kind of have a general sense of what you're getting into when you open this. You kind of know what the flavor profile's roughly going to be. But with these, there's a huge variety here. And if you are trying to jump into this category, you kind of need to try several things before you can really get, a sense of what you're looking at. And that's, kind of a commitment for people to jump into this. But it's all, again, I think it's a strength, but becomes a challenge as well.
Yeah, I think it's, those are great. I won't repeat what y'all have said because those are both amazing answers. I would have said this if I wasn't going last, man. But yeah, I think what we found at Balcones has been honestly just like the steadfastness of the people who are bringing along in the process. Wolfgang Goethe has a quote in his poem Holy Longing where he says, "Distance cannot make you falter," and I've really felt that a lot over the years. And the partners that we bring on are like, well, we had a big meeting a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, where our private, our investors, the owners, were telling us, this American single malt thing, it's not taking off like we thought it would. And we were looking at the Nielsen data, the market data for all the sales. They're like, we're going to wait and see, where the segment goes. And we had to point out, like, we're 40% of the numbers in the Nielsen data. Like, what do you mean we have to figure out what we're going to do? We just need to decide that we're going to do this, and commit ourselves to this, and not be, it's great that we're having this panel. It's great that we're here. It's great that the awareness is rising, but I don't want to be swayed, and I don't want the other producers to be just on the winds of the next trend, we need to put our nose to the grindstone and do it. So I think that's the challenge, is just the resoluteness to just be like, let's buckle up and do this and the folks who don't want to do that they don't put us on our menus,
Sure.
on their menus, it happens.
Right. I think there is always a little bit of pressure too on the price point of American single malts, especially when we're talking about cocktail culture and including them in cocktails. American single malts are inherently expensive to make, and that's just true for all single malts, right? There's no such thing as really a cheap single malt. So the price point there, I know there's a few producers that have been trying different ways in order to meet service where we can with the price point, but it's going to continually be a challenge, especially when we're, looking at increasing prices across the board, but also when we're talking about the creativity, the R&D, the creativity, all of those special barrels, all of the fun blending, all of the finishes, that all takes a huge amount of time and a huge amount of cost. So it's always going to be difficult to find that happy medium where it's not overwhelming for a bar or for a consumer to pick that bottle off the shelf and try something new. Like we said, this is such a new category. There's so much education that we're having to do for a general consumer, for people that we hire on that are new to the industry. You say single malt, everybody thinks Scotch, and I swear, I get on this soapbox all the time. I swear all of the boomer dads shared one really bad bottle of Scotch, because I don't know about you guys, but I grew up with all of my dad's friends being like, oh, it's terrible and it smells like an ashtray. Don't ever try it. And that's so not the case. And so it's this weird cultural thread through all of us that have been raised by those dads, I guess. And so not only are we trying to educate on what the category is just at a base level, but I feel like we're also kind of fighting back against some misapprehensions about what it could be just based on the words alone. So between those two things, definitely education. Everything that we do is educate, educate, educate. We talk about the commission. We talk about each other. I spend a lot of time talking about McCarthy's, obviously, because it's my baby. But I spend a great deal of time talking about all the American single malt producers, because it really is a rising tides raises all ships kind of situation. The more people know about the category, the more people are excited about it, and then it's not such a scary proposition to see a shelf dedicated to it in a liquor store. It's not so scary to open up a menu at a whiskey bar and see an American single malt section there. All right, Jay, it's your turn. New riff.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. Great to be here. The first thing I'd have you do is look at your little menu here and take out the writing implement of your choice, and where it says New Riff Sour Mash American Single Malt. I want you to cross out the word American and write in the word Kentucky. It says on the label, Kentucky
That's my bad.
Single Malt. That is quite all right. It's the purview of this panel that we are American Single Malts, but we call it Kentucky because not only are we there, but we make it in the same techniques, technology, et cetera, as we do all of our sour mash, bourbon, rye, malted rye, all the other things we make. So this is New Riff's Sour Mash Single Malt. My goodness, where to start? This has been a
Take
labor.
your time. We're really flying through this. I
labor of
I told
love.
you guys to keep it pithy,
Yeah.
but take your time.
Since 2014. So New Riff just turned 10 years old, inspired by some of your distilleries over the years to build what we did. And we started distilling in June of 14. In December of 14, we started the first whiskeys that would become this project. So we were not distilling 6 months before we bit this off. And we came to it, I hope, with a little humility, not really knowing what would work in a sour mash, column beer still environment. Didn't really have a lot of templates to go on. And so we threw a lot of things on the wall to see what would stick. There are no less than 5 mash bills that went into this. Some of them are 100% of a malted barley. For example, Golden Promise, which is a Scotch whiskey barley. But 2 of them are beer mash bills contributed by our master distiller, Brian Sprance, who came to us from the beer industry, from Boston Beer. And so his contribution to this was, let's try some beer mash bills. One of them is a barley wine that has got about 3% chocolate malt in it. So there is this little thread of cocoa running through the whole production. The other beer-related mash bill is a Belgian quadruple. And these are expressed through 6 different cask types, as you can see on on the menu. Again, we didn't know what would work. We knew we didn't want to put them in all one kind of cask. For example, new charred oak. So there are some new barrels, also some used ones. All of this got spun into a blend finally. So it was a project really of 3 phases: creating the mash bills, the aging regimen, and then it was an exercise in blending as well. We cut out ourselves a lot of work to make this. Finally, it's bottled like everything we do, no chill filtration. And this one happens, almost all of New Riff's production is bottled in bond, but we have a handful of things that are cask strength, since we're in the malt world. It's not barrel proof, it's cask strength, I gotta remember. And this is full barrel proof at 113.8. So.
Lovely.
All right, here we go. Where do we see the future of American Single Malt? I know, big one.
Big one. Real big one.
We're strength to strength here. We're really starting to dig in now.
We all prepared talking points.
Yeah.
We're just too afraid to share them. Okay. Yeah, my talking point not as well rehearsed on this one. There's a poet that we read a lot of at the distillery, an English gentleman by the name of David White, and he says ambition is desire frozen. It's his way of saying don't have ambitions, be grounded in the present. And that's kind of, I don't know, I had a quote up there, another quote up there too on our slides from him. And lately, the last couple of years, I think we found ourselves in our process being really trying to be grounded in presence and where we are. That's a kind of obnoxious thing to try to do as a distiller or blender, because you're having to lay stuff down that you won't harvest for many years. But yeah, that's a little bit where I am now with the category itself, kind of connected back to my Resolute comment. I think we really have to put our head down and do the work. We don't really have a hope that we have hope, but we don't think that there's a silver bullet on the horizon that's going to turn this category into from 100,000 9-liter cases right now to 1 million in 2 years. I think it's going to be a lot of steady work and a lot of relationship building and a lot of good small patchwork solutions in all these small regions where people are popping up producing this. So that's my hope, is that it becomes this kind of patchwork and we get this slow growth, and really we get ourselves into the hands, our head distiller Jared says this a lot, we get ourselves in the hands of people who really want to drink American Single Malt, and that we're not hoodwinking, we're not giving some false value proposition to them and trying to convert someone who doesn't really want to do it. We want to find all the people who want to drink Balcones, who want to drink American Single Malt, and get a bottle into their hands so they can have it on their bar in their home. And then for us, that should be enough. We did it. There's no reason to convert the whole world. So that's what our hope is. That's what I hope, is that we see this slow growth, we see these relationships built, we see more of this, and we see this trickle out into something very relational and grounded in presence. So that's me.
So my answer, I don't know. But I think what I mean by that too is that I think everybody who's here and other distillers that I know who are making American Single Malt, nobody jumped into this to make a quick buck. People are passionate about, distilling in general. Don't jump into that if you're trying to make a lot of money. But also, single malt specifically, people are really passionate about this. All the distillers that I know, blenders on the teams, are really passionate and curious, and are trying new things constantly, experimenting with proof, entry proof, and other methods, and trying to always get better and better. I think sometimes with certain distilleries, there's this throwback to the past, and you're trying to stick exactly with what you've always done because that's what people expect, and that's great. That's fine too. But I think with American Single Malt, people are experimenting, and I can speak for myself with what I'm doing. I'm just trying different yeasts and trying different techniques, and I don't know what that's gonna taste like. I'm not sure. And to me, that's what's exciting about it. I think people are already finding interesting new things, and I think that's I hope that stays a part of the category forever, that it's always about pushing and experimenting and learning and growing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bright future, if that's not too trite a thing to say. I want to go back to what you alluded to earlier, Caitlin, about the pending codification at the TTB, the regulatory body, adding a new whiskey. This does not happen very often in American history. It had, to my mind, I think the last new whiskey was light whiskey. Can anyone think of a newer instance of an official, a legalized American whiskey? It was,
And the cool thing is that it's this one specifically is being defined and pushed for by the producers, right?
Right.
So it's not consumer groups, it's not the federal regulations on behalf of the consumer groups to make sure that people that are picking up these bottles off the shelf aren't getting confused with what they're buying. It's actually the people that are making it that want to build that creative sandbox around the category, because without having some constraints, you can't really see the full potential of anyone's creativity.
Right. I think in the long term, generations from now, the fact that one of the world's great whiskey making nations, United States of America, has a new whiskey, and that does not come along very often. What's going to be the next big American malt? It's probably one that is not even conceived of yet. 10, 20 years from now, who knows what there could be.
Hey, come on, we're going to be around forever. What are you talking about?
If you take the long view, this is a momentous time in America's whiskey history, that we are adding a new whiskey. It does not come around very often.
No, it does not. And that it's kind of gorgeous, because it leads into one of the things that I wanted to touch on was that when you look at that history of American whiskey, single malt's only been around for a couple decades now. And let's look at bourbon, right? Everybody's really comfortable with bourbon, with its potential, what we can do with it in a glass, the bottles that we buy and collect dust, unfortunately, instead of actually being consumed amongst friends, and as a part of the celebration of being humans. So imagine what will possibly take place within the American single malt category in a few decades, right? We're so young, and we're still in that really beautiful exploration phase between all that creativity, and with everybody pushing in the right direction. We've all decided, this is our dream, this is our creative sandbox. To see the heights that we could climb to, and I agree with you, absolutely. I had to make the joke because that's my job. But the American single malt that might be the definition of the category, not that I necessarily want there to be a defining single dram because of the provenance across the entire nation, but that company, that brand, probably hasn't even started yet. And so to imagine where we could be in 50 or 60 years, it's really cool to have the opportunity to get on the ground floor of something that's so very new, and to be a part of the people that get to go out there and educate on why you should be as excited about it as all of us spirits nerds that actually get to go to work on Monday making it. All right, here we go. Our next sample is the 6-year McCarthy's Oregon Single Malt. Clear Creek Distillery was founded in 1985 with the goal of turning the bounty of the Pacific Northwest into, I won't kick you out, I promise. Turning the bounty of the Pacific Northwest into fruit brandies and liqueurs that would rival their European counterparts. On a separate trip to Europe, Steve was really excited about the possibility of a single malt, and with craft brewing taking Oregon by storm, all the pieces of potentially putting together an Oregon peated single malt were there. Unfortunately, due to the scale of the endeavor, it wasn't necessarily possible for those craft maltsters to take that project on, and so Steve resorted to importing that peat malted barley from Scotland, which is what we still do today. First distilled in 1994, first released in 1998. As far as we've been able to research, it is the first American single malt post-prohibition to ever be released to consumer shelves. Thank you, I appreciate it. Steve McCarthy and his legacy of adventure and creativity is honored today by the current distilling team, myself, Garrett Trotter Ramos, and Everett Rubin. The three of us still make this beautiful single malt on a single pass in hybrid pot stills in Hood River, Oregon. We age it in both new and used Oregon oak for either 3 or 6 years. The 6 is what we're trying today. We've also recently expanded the lineup to include single barrels of both a 3 and 6, as well as some sherry cask finishes of the 6-year, an Oloroso and a Pedro Jimenez. It is smoky, it is peaty, but it is good.
Oh, it's yummy.
What kind of market and consumer do you consider your audience to be?
Caitlin, can I say one thing real quick?
Sure.
About
No,
this?
absolutely.
So
Are
when
you just going to tell me it's terrible in front of all these wonderful people?
I love this is one of my favorite whiskeys. When she says Oregon oak, she doesn't mean Quercus alba grown in Oregon. She means Quercus garryana, right? Which it's very funny and lovely to me that the first American single malt was in a Quercus garryana cask.
Oh yeah, no, the amount of molds that Steve was willing to break was essentially all of them.
Now other in bourbon, whoever Scotch or kind of catching up. Maybe they do Chinkapin, maybe they do some other kind of oak, but very funny to me that you picked, this
it's
really,
an Oregon single malt.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, focusing in on all of these things and creating that product right away. It's very interesting.
And again, leans into the development of the provenance of all the regions of whiskey.
Yeah, just that the whole category, at that beginning point was already doing something that no one else was,
completely
overseas
esoteric,
was not.
and because we can.
Yeah. Oregon oak, come on.
Well, I'll let you take it up with Steve. All right, so what kind of market and consumer do we consider our audience to be? So now we're talking about the people that we're hoping decide to take a chance on an American single malt, but also when it comes to putting American single malt in bars and restaurants and liquor stores, our customers are your customers. So this is an opportunity for us to essentially share trade secrets and what we're doing, the kind of person that we're seeking out when we're talking to them about American single malt.
I'll start. For us, a Kentucky bourbon producer, there's a challenge in getting bourbon lovers who are New Riff fans. They come to us because they love bourbon and rye and things like that. To sometimes even to enjoy these. There's one of the mash bills in our whiskey is made with peated imported Scottish barley, just like yours. Probably the same supplier even, as far as I know. Could be. And we put a little bit of that, 10.8% to be exact, in the blend. And I wanted people to, their response to the peat would be, well, now that you mention it, Jay, I do taste the peat. Perfect. Not too much. There's a place for super peaty things, which I adore, and adored selling that cask of your whiskey that I got when I was a retailer. That was a lot of fun. But we have to tread a little lightly there. One reason, as you alluded to, people are bourbon lovers is they're Scotch haters. So that is our audience.
They all shared that one bottle of terrible Scotch.
That is our audience in the bourbon world in Kentucky. And so God bless them, this went over the heads of a lot of folks in Bardstown. They hadn't had something like that before. So unlike most of our production, which is taking bourbon and pushing it out to the world, we almost have to go out to the world that understands and already enjoys single malts and bring it back to Kentucky, in a sense, educationally speaking. So that is the sort of almost plan in reverse that we face with our single malt.
Did you guys forget you still had an answer?
Yeah, we got one.
So consumer, that's what we're talking about? Who do I want to buy my whiskey, basically?
Yeah.
So just jumping back real quick, I think another challenge or interesting thing about American single malt is the size of distilleries is all over the place. I always joke about, like, I moved from Balcones to Ology, and there we had, 4 almost 3,000 gallon stills, and I have one 300-gallon still. So, some people are putting away 20 barrels a day. I'm putting, one a week, maybe just sort of see where I get. So it's much smaller scale. It's a much smaller market. But yeah, to be pithy about it, I'm making whiskey for myself. I'm making whiskey that I want to, that I can squirrel away bottles of and drink for a long time. But I also think that for most of us, like what I was saying earlier about so many of American single malt distillers are curious people. I think it has to be you're making whiskey for these kinds of people too. People that are, we talk about education, but in some ways you're dealing with people who do know a little bit about this at least, and are not coming in totally blind and are interested and willing to learn. You can educate all you want, but it's people who are receptive to that you're going to actually reach. And so, I think that's a growing category of people anyway. people that are getting into spirits, excited to learn, and willing to grow and kind of push themselves in these boundaries, and are excited to have whiskey from distilleries that are doing those things, willing to grow and push. And I think that's kind of who we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time to be a whiskey producer, not just an ASM producer, but a whiskey producer. In 2019, just before COVID happened, like a month or two before COVID hit, I think it was like February of 2019, we did a Texas Whiskey Summit at the distillery where we invited all the Texas whiskey clubs in the whole state to the distillery, and we had this huge day of like games and competitions and like, oh yeah, like get 4 blind new make samples in front of you. You have to sort heads cut and tails cut and new make, and all, like we did like this crazy thing, and there was like 500 people there, and I think the wall between the producer and the consumer has started to dissolve the last 10-15 years, and that's been a huge, I mean, we've definitely benefited from that, and now I think between even those categories of consumers, as whiskey kind of is still growing. I mean, people are laying it down like wild in Kentucky and all around the world. I think we're starting to see the divisions between even those like category of drinkers and traditional marketing sense start to kind of like waver a little bit. I just went home, a couple months ago, and my mother, who's 63 years old and raised me, without a drop of liquor in the house and like frowning on anyone who brought a bottle of wine over, she had a bottle of Elijah Craig barrel proof like sitting at the bar. I'm like, she's making whiskey sours out of Elijah Craig, I'm like, what? I can't even get that bottle, And so like the weird things are happening, and so it's really it's a time that's not very predictable, I don't think. And so again, I think for Balcones, we're coming back to, we need to be who we are. Do we need to tailor our message a little bit and have like two styles of message, have like the upper crust message and a lot of info for the people who really want it? Absolutely. But like things are getting weird, and that's exciting because things are starting to open up. And so, you can't take anyone at face value. You never should have. For us, I mean, our there's a sweet spot for our brand. We find people who are past kind of the Crown, Johnny Walker Red stage, and they're like, oh yeah, I think I know a few things. I'm ready to try something. Oh yeah, I've heard of malt. Interesting. Yeah, that's in a bourbon mash bill, right? Malt. Like we're definitely like those kind of people are the people that I feel like we can get a hook into, and who are susceptible. That's a terrible word. Who are amenable to our spiel. But yeah, I think it's a really exciting time across the board. And I don't know. I'm not a bartender. Have never owned a bar. Worked a little bit in a bar, but in a wine bar in Waco, not the same as a whiskey bar. But yeah, I don't fully know what it looks like on y'all's end. I'm excited during the questions section to kind of hear some feedback in that regard, and not even get just questions, but just some feedback on what it's looking like from that end. But yeah, definitely like needing to be sensitive to the changing demographic, and again, be true to ourselves so that we're not trying to sell a message just to like hook someone in.
I think that's great when it comes to, talking to all the friends that we have across the country that are making American Single Malt. There is this really wonderful camaraderie, not only between all the producers, but also between the producers and the consumers, right? A lot of times the consumer groups most of the time, the consumer groups are bigger nerds about whiskey than we are. I know that there are Discord servers that have very graciously allowed me into their ranks, and I learn more about the global category from them as enthusiasts that I feel like I would ever have access to, because I'm already spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week just trying to make one American Single Malt, right? So absolutely the curiosity of your average consumer is amazing. But I would say that specifically for McCarthy's, we're definitely looking towards people that are the nerds, but also the philosophers, right? For McCarthy's, it's a really big and bold whiskey, and so it's something that really is the frame around your experience, right? We want to make sure that it's something that when you try it in a glass, it actually draws your attention for a second. It's not something that you're going to forget immediately at that first sip. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about, what we could potentially do with McCarthy's as we grow, what some of the different expressions could be, and you're really trying to boil down not only what this whiskey means to the producers, but also what the brand essentially has been over the decades, that's what we're looking at. It's that frame around the experience, that it's thought provoking and it actually makes you pause for a second and appreciate what's in your glass, and not just take that glass and run away with it, right? So those are the kinds of things I feel like that we're looking towards. But the curious, the hesitant, the nerds, and the philosophers. That's what my cheat notes, right? I feel that really encompasses people that are willing to take that jump and get out of their comfort zone for a half a second and try something new and try something that they haven't had before. And certainly in today's consumer climate, we still have people that are being really curious, but I definitely have talked to a handful of bartender friends where people are willing to spend the money on a craft cocktail, but they're only willing to take one step outside of their comfort zone. So if they see that first cocktail and the first one or two things on the description they're familiar with, and they're like, all right, well, I'm happy to spend this money, and I'm pretty sure, because I know a few of these things, that I'm gonna like it. And so they're willing to take that leap of faith on the 2 or 3 other ingredients. So too does that same thing go with American Single Malt. So we have to spend the time educating people enough that when they see an American Single Malt, they're willing to take that extra step and be like, oh, a peated single malt from Oregon, or oh, a sour mash from Kentucky, or all of these wonderful and creative things within the category. We have to be able to meet them in the middle where they can take that one step without getting too far out of their comfort zone. All right, well, we are going to have a cocktail at some point, and Tales of the Cocktail are amazing, and I threatened these guys with their deaths if they weren't pithy, so we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. So I promise the cocktail is coming, but we're going to go ahead and skip over the cocktail for the meantime.
We'll get there.
Here we go. Don't look at those. It's secrets. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. It's fine. All right, here we go. It's game time. How can on-premise be a part of the burgeoning American single malt category?
Should we say it together?
Oh, God.
Put us
on the menu.
on the list. Make a category in your whiskey selection that calls out not just other or American whiskeys, but treat it like the category it's becoming. Back to the comment I made about liquor stores. Some of the best liquor stores in the country don't acknowledge
Maybe the party
this.
source?
Actually, they do not. They do not have a sign. God love them. My friends and family. In our parking lot, they don't have a sign that says American Single Malt. I need to fix that. But call it out as the category it is and the category it's becoming. I don't mean you need to carry 25 of them. You might only carry the ones in your neighborhood. That's helpful. But it's a distinct category of whiskey that I think consumers can get into. And if they are told about it and come back to your bar, I tried that single malt last week. What's another one you have? Boom. That's a nice sale. And a nice ring, and you're winning a fan by educating them. So, yes, putting mention of it on a list is the most important thing. I would love to say make cocktails with it too. Many single malts, because they are more expensive to make, the barley alone is far more than bourbon and rye and things like that. It's hard to find one that is $1 an ounce at wholesale. That kind of magic number for bars. But especially if you operate a whiskey-centric bar, I think this is a category that it would behoove on-premise to get behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like Gabe, I've never owned a bar. I don't know how it works, but I would even say if you're not a whiskey-focused bar, every restaurant now has local craft beer. You expect that when you go into any restaurant that's not like. So yeah, I think it makes sense too to add local, your local whiskeys to those menus. That makes a lot of sense to me. But what do I know?
Yeah, we've had a lot of feedback from both retailers and on-premise folks over the years, and I think a lot of people. I said this earlier. We're really excited about the TTB, recognizing the standard of identity, and kind of giving us a little bit of teeth, having it recognized at the federal level. We don't think that's necessarily going to be a silver bullet. I think it will help because over the years we've heard a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, we'll have a spot on the menu." Once the TTB recognizes it, and I have to say, okay, well the TTB doesn't recognize orange wine, or I was at a bar yesterday, they had like Pachuga mezcal, tequila, sotol, raicilla, orange wine, bubbly orange wine. I'm like, what the hell? There's like every possible categorization. And then whiskey is like, oh, you got your Jack and your everything's just like American whiskey and Scotch. I'm like, are you serious? Like, we're missing something. And I think that is, again, comes back to us as needing to educate in a different way. I mean, obviously, agave, there's been a fire lit under, spirits from Mexico. It's a powerful category. It's an awesome movement. But yeah, we need to do something as producers to kind of educate in a way where we're advocating for that consistently. And I hope that the TTB recognizing it is gonna help. That if liquor stores have that section, and the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, if anyone is in the retail space, we have a lot of resources, shelf banners to kind of like isolate a section with the commission artistry and the commission graphics to say, hey, this is American Single Malt with educational tools and all that, shelf talkers. We have all that through the commission, but the bar side is a little trickier, because we're not going to design a menu for you, So yeah, I'd echo that. Get on the menu. I love the cocktail call out that if we're not the first or second ingredient, but you can hide us in the second or third ingredient, then you might ease people into it. That's great.
Yeah, I got to give credit to Jake Powell for that. That's the Jake Powell Trojan horse.
That's awesome.
Meeting people where they're at. That really is the kind of the be-all, end-all when we're talking about moving this category forward. This movement wasn't, Steve McCarthy didn't stand on a loading dock somewhere and look into the sky and say, you know what, I'm going to light a fire that's going to become a revolution for American whiskey. He just wanted to make something just like Daniel, just like you said, right? You wanted to make something because you like it and you wanted to squirrel some those bottles away for yourself. There's no doubt in my mind that wasn't Steve's entire intention. I'm fairly certain that's why Clear Creek exists in the first place, because he had fallen in love with pear brandy in his travels across Europe and was like, oh, I can't find pear brandy in the States. Well, it can't be that hard to figure out how to make it and start a distillery. And yet here we are, right? And we have this huge industry, not only with single malt, but with craft distilling on top of that, being well over 2,000 distilleries. So when you're talking about being a part of this category, it's been to date a movement of excited and passionate and involved individuals that has gotten us to this point. It's gotten us to where we are, as I drop a pen. That last hurdle is going to have to be in partnership with not only our consumers, but also with the retail space on and off premise, getting us over that final hurdle, right? It's been a team effort from start to finish, and we're so close to the finish line. And the TTB, we're waiting for the TTB to give us the silver bullet to decide that they're actually going to go ahead and recognize American Single Malt as a category. That doesn't really even matter. They could wait to do it for another 15 years. What's important is that the people that make it have decided it's a thing. The consumers that are buying, thousands and thousands of cases across all of these brands have decided it's a thing. So if we as a team with our partners in the bars and restaurants decide that it's a category to them as well, then we've already done the thing. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's actually officially recognized by the TTB. Thank you. While we get the cocktail passed out, I'm going to make you guys think on your feet while we get all the logistics going. What would be your American Single Malt elevator pitch? I know, right? So mean.
Explaining it, or should I convince somebody to drink it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Convincing him to drink it. Hey, where are you going to the bar tonight? While you're at the bar, why don't you take a look at this whiskey? How are you gonna convince them to take that leap of faith on an American Single Malt?
I might start by telling them there's something in it for everybody, right? To the person in the elevator. Well, I'm a big Ardbeg fan. Hey, the first one was full of peat. You'll love it, Well, I like sherry cask. There are a bunch of those too. There's also, going back to your comment about the provenance, the regionality, terroir is too much of a loaded term, I think, but there are American flavors and traditions in all 50 states that can get some inspiration into a single malt. Could be a local barley, things like that. So I think there's something in this category for all whiskey lovers. If they don't love whiskey, we have bigger problems. But
Sure.
if you like whiskey,
Hey, Gabe's mom's got whiskey in
Yeah,
the bar
she
now.
does.
Look
She's
how
got a
far we've
lot
come,
in the bar. Yeah.
I think there's something in there for everybody to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you can also come from different directions with American Single Malt, which is interesting. Here you do have people who are, in some ways, kind of making. Yeah, if you ask American Single Malt producers, some will say, "I'm trying to make something like Scotch," and some will explicitly say, "I'm not trying to do that." And so you are coming from these different directions. You have people who use a lot of New American oak or other kinds of new oak, French, well, obviously Oregon. So for people who are coming from a bourbon background, there is sort of a gateway where, hey, this is if you like some of those flavors, you should try this. It's an interesting kind of riff on some of those things. Or on the other hand, coming from the Scotch world, where if you like Scotch single malt, you should try this. There's some interesting things going on in this category that might be interesting to someone who enjoys those kinds of whiskeys. So you can kind of come from different angles, which I think is an interesting thing about the category.
I'm not going to say anything
That's
that
fair.
they didn't already say. That was
Yeah.
great.
No,
That
it was an
awesome. Way
impromptu
to go.
question,
You don't even
and
hear me.
Daniel and Jay absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
So looks like we're just about finished passing out our cocktail. So this is our opportunity to talk about our friends at Lost Lantern.
Yay.
So, right? And there's already some love in the room. Love it. Lost Lantern is an independent bottler that's been shining a light on the independent spirit since 2018. Its founders, Nora Ganley Roper and Adam Polonsky, started their journey by visiting over 100 distilleries across the country and learning how their creativity and climate change the flavors and aromas that you get in the bottle. In learning all of these stories and steeping in the passion of all of the producers, they were inspired to find a way to help Americans discover both large and small producers and help them explore the American whiskey landscape just like they had the opportunity to. Their releases include single barrels, specially chosen from distilleries across the country, as well as curated collections, and then special Lost Lantern blends, which is what we're trying here today. The American vatted malt is not technically a single malt, but it is a blend of single malts from friends across the country, and to us here on the panel represented a way for us to introduce you to a variety of single malts and how it can play in a very simple composition like the American Buck. So now that we've asked all of the loaded questions, it's time for you to be even meaner than I was and hit the panel with some questions. Dale?
You talked about the issue of pricing. Why not lower the proof? Why are these so high?
Because the nerds make us.
But why are you playing to the nerds? Why don't you play to the general audience?
Sure, that's a great point.
I mean, for us, it's, and I think the majority of American single malt producers, I'd say, are running on pot stills for the most part. There are some hybrids. There's a lot of hybrids, and then there's a handful of columns. But just our process doesn't allow us to go. We start to develop a haze in the spirits really at somewhere around between 46 and 47 if we don't want a chill filter. So there are some brands that have jumped on and done some heavier filtration and dropped things down to around 43. But yeah, I think the process doesn't really lend itself to the lower proofs. That being said, I think we have seen folks. I don't want to toot our own horn, but I think ourselves, Stranahan's, and then Virginia just released 3 whiskeys at $45 a bottle. Virginia Distillery, they're in the cocktail. There's a handful that have brought their price points and their proof down to about as low as they feel comfortable going. But yeah, I think that'll always be a bit of a barrier.
I mean, when Fritz was making his old Potrero at a very high proof, he finally wanted to get a bigger awning, so he went down to 90, and people started using it in their cocktails. I think there's some pay dirt there to be.
Yeah.
And I don't think people are so bothered by the idea of not filtering as much as they used to be. We don't care anymore that it's not crystal clear in the bottle or in the drink when you. I think we're growing up,
Yeah.
Right.
I think we can live with that, especially when you tell them you got more flavor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't filter.
I mean, and it's due to your work, but also the work of producers across the country that we're spending that time rebuilding the culture of drinking in the United States. So much information by the general public was lost in the 13 short years of Prohibition. And so I should be able to say the word brandy and not have people shaking their boots thinking it's going to be sweet and taste like the inside of a grandmother's purse. And yet, as a brandy distiller first and an American single malt producer second, that's my biggest challenge, is trying to teach people that brandy and schnapps and eau de vie are all the same thing, and it's not scary. But to your point, I definitely, you mentioned some really great producers across the country that are adding things like that to their portfolio. And that's something that McCarthy's has also always had as well. We were traditionally a 3-year at 85 proof. We still have the 3-year at 85 proof. I don't even think we've changed the price on it since Steve sold the company to Hood River Distillers 10 years ago. So everybody is finding their way to kind of meet everybody where they can and to meet that price point. But it is always going to be really difficult just because of the nature of the category.
Yeah.
We kind of screwed ourselves over because we put on our bottle from the very beginning, never chill filter. Like, damn. And it's on every bottle of Balcones ever sold ever, so not going to happen for us. But
Sure.
yeah, someone else maybe.
If at New Riff we were trying to make scotch, and we did everything we possibly could, pot still included, to make scotch, and we aged it only in a used barrel, and we didn't have any of the stuff that is in a new barrel. That's one reason why unchill filtered bourbon needs to be higher than unchill filtered scotch. Look at all those wonderful no chill filtration scotches. Shout out to my friends at Springbank who started the whole thing. They're 92 proof. And you can do that in Scotland. There's not as much stuff in the whiskey. But in a new charred oak barrel, there's a lot of stuff, wood, proteins and things coming out of the wood, and they will turn considerably cloudy, throwing chunks in the bottle. At much below 100 proof. So in our case, almost everything we make is bottled in bond. We consider to be the world's highest standard for quality in a brown spirit, still since 1897. So everything we make is no less than 100. And we can be unchill filtered and cut it to 100 and get away with it. It's clear in the bottle. If we were making something much more like a scotch, I think we would take it down to 92 proof. I'm very happy to drink 92 proof scotch. But it would be hard to do that and be unchill filtered in making American whiskey with the new cask.
The bourbon guys have showed us that 100 proof is a kind of a sweet spot that people like and drink it at that proof. I mean, bottled in bond at 100 is really popular and has a wide audience.
Yeah, we might someday introduce a version of New Riff Single Malt at 100, but to take it down to 90, let alone 85, God bless you, Caitlin.
Yeah, wow. We need to talk.
Is and thus to chill filter it is totally anathema to the quality standard that at least we've set, retaining especially all the texture in the whiskey. One of my goals in life is to convince bartenders that no chill filtration is great for the cocktail as well as the snifter, that it improves the texture especially of a cocktail. So we couldn't go much below 100, but yeah, Dale, I'm going to take that up with our team. Let's do a version of it someday that takes it down to the bonded level.
What do you mean by stuff in the barrel?
Without getting into a lot of chemistry that I probably don't know a lot about, but there's a lot of material that comes out of a new barrel into a whiskey the first time. It's why bourbon is darker than scotch.
Right, but is that a thing where
Yeah,
American Single Malt has to also use a new book?
It does not. No.
It does not.
No.
Correct.
Then why can't you find used barrels with less stuff?
We could. In our case, we used new and used oak.
Yeah, we use both new and used oak. It's a choice on flavor and aroma, right? So the new oak gives you a certain flavor profile, and the trade might be that there's a little bit of darker color. You get some more extractives. Also, not only just toasted and caramelized wood sugars that give us that color, but you're also getting organic acids that come out of the wood grain itself, and that will interact with alcohol over time and turn into esters, which are fruity and floral notes that we all really love in our whiskeys. And so if you're using a new oak, you're potentially getting more of that quality, which is more flavor in a shorter amount of time, but can sometimes precipitate in the whiskey and create like what looks kind of like dust bunnies in the bottle. It's very familiar for bourbon drinkers, less so for anybody that's going to explore into an American whiskey or an American single malt. But it's essentially all these choices that we're making are based on the identity and flavor that we're trying to hit. And sometimes that comes with, hey, we're never going to release anything that's chill filtered. We're never going to release anything under 94. Or, by choosing to not filter at all, we might be expecting our customers to deal with a little bit of particulate and barrel char at the bottom of the bottle, which is, again, leads into the education of the choices that are being made and why we're making them. Dave, you had a question?
I just wanted to ask about chill filtration as a concept. If you can put some, we're sort of in that category of talking about it. Can we talk about some actual details to what qualifies as chill filtration the bottle. So like, where's that cutoff point? As this is clearly a passionate subject for you.
Shall I answer that one?
Yeah.
I'll start with that.
I don't know anything about it.
Good to see you, Dave. It is an obsession of mine for a long time. When we started New Riff, that was the foundational quality precept. We didn't know we would be a bottled and bond distillery mostly, but we did promise to ourselves not to chill filter. We run a filter. It's a sock. I think it's 5 micron. A sock, I mean, it's a long bag, and that strains out most of the char. If you look in the bottom of many bottles of New Riff, you'll see a little, about centimeter wide, little circle of dust at the bottom. That's the barrel char. We could take that out with an even tighter filtration. So it's not to say that the whiskey is completely unfiltered, just like an unfiltered wine. When you buy a bottle of French Burgundy and it says on it non-filtré, it doesn't mean there's grape seeds in the bottle or pieces of the stem. Of course they filter out those kind of solid materials, but it means non-filtré, a French wine, not subjected to an aggressive filtration that stabilizes the wine cosmetically, but also removes inevitably some of the character. That's the best way people like Robert Parker would say to bottle a wine. We believe it's also the best way to bottle a whiskey. So yes, there is some filtration. We don't put chunks of char and pieces of wood and splinters and things like that in the whiskey.
You have a screen on your dump trough.
Yes, exactly. It is physically or barrier filtered only. What we don't do is the aggressive chilling of the whiskey, like down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit or something, that forces all of the cloudiness that Caitlin was mentioning. Indeed, if you see this in a bottle of whiskey, you hold it up and it looks like a cloud floating in the whiskey. That is formed when the whiskey is chilled or when it is hit with a lot of water, when it is heavily diluted. So if a Kentucky bourbon producer is going from a barrel proof of 130 and wanting to take that down to 90 proof or 80 proof, they're adding a lot of water, which their shareholders love because they're selling you more water. And so they subject it to chill filtration. I'm not saying there's not a place for that. I've enjoyed plenty of handles of cheap bourbon in my life. At 80 proof, it's all good. My dad drinks those, whatever. But if you are going, in our opinion, at New Riff for the best that whiskey can be, we don't want to subject it to that kind of aggressive, harder, tighter filtration and strip some of those flavors out. One of the things that gets attenuated, is the word I use, when you chill filter, is fatty acids. What is fatty? Rich,
Lipids.
buttery, lipids, creamy, fat in your steak, right? That amplifies the texture of whiskey. I hear all the time from people drinking New Riff, boy, it doesn't drink like 100 proof, or it doesn't taste like 113.8 proof because we left in all of the texture and didn't denude any of that texture by the filtration. So yes, we are passionate about it.
I'd also say, to the original question about price, I think the filtration question is interesting, but it's also not the only reason that sometimes American Single Malt is maybe a bit pricier than something else. I mean, there's a lot of production decisions that ups the production costs for everybody here.
Barley.
Yeah, I mean, if you're choosing to bring in Golden Promise
Time.
barley from Scotland,
It's
or
$1
you're
a
choosing,
pound.
to use special Texas-grown barley, or like Westland in Washington, they've done 50 different barley varieties, purple Egyptian, just all these crazy things, and they're not getting a whole lot of sugar out of it. It's interesting, it's exciting, but it's also expensive. Barrels. Yeah, if you're using new oak, or Balcones getting ISC to make special custom barrels, all of these things are production decisions that, have added a lot of cost to the bottle. Yeast, everything in there is, I think it makes a better product, but it also adds a couple bucks to the bottle.
Okay, our last question here in the front.
Thank you. Thank you for the killer panel, by the way.
Thanks, Tales of the Cocktail. They're the one that hosted it.
Well, it seems like you're okay. So I came from a biology background before I ended up in hospitality. And in taxonomics, we have like lumping and splitting, right? If you're familiar with that. And it's obviously this is like what you guys are going for, and you're talking about is a really positive split, right? Where you're defining a category. Obviously, people could go either direction on that. Jay, when you were talking earlier, you know, you pointed out on your label, it says Kentucky single malt. Do you think that's part of the challenge? Like, would you love to see, when you talk about menus, would you love to just see a single malt section, regardless of whether or not they're American or Scotch? Or then you're almost going in the other direction where you're like, I want to see an American single malt section, and also we're actually a Kentucky single malt. Do you think that makes the conversation more difficult, or do you want to be seen as truly American single malt, or do you just want to be recognized as single malt to get onto menus and be more approachable to people?
That's a great question.
I mean, I think at this point, I think all of us would be super stoked and over the moon just to see American single malt in general, because it's such a new category. But I think also, of the four of us that are here, memory serve, well, you don't have a label yet, Daniel, because yours is, you guys got to try an experimental with his. It's not even in bottles yet. But ours says Oregon single malt. Yours says Kentucky single malt. Your guys' says Texas single malt, correct?
Yep.
So yes, both to those
Yeah.
questions. I think it depends on. I mean, each. We're making products that we want to drink, and we're making products that our customers want to drink, just like the bartenders are trying to do the same, right? It depends on the kind of bar you are. Are you going to do something where you're just going to pick 4 or 5 of your local stuff from your state, or are you going to try to pick some larger brands that cross the breadth of the category? That's kind of the fun part, is that it provides so many options, not only between just the generalities of geography, but also the generalities of the flavors that each one of these distilleries is shooting for.
I think this goes back a little bit to the regional quality of American whiskeys, and I think we're not really there yet. For example, Texas. Suppose in the fullness of time, a great many Texas malt producers use the live oak.
Everyone's
Right.
advocating for me. This is
Yeah.
great.
So, and that becomes the thing,
you're such a sweet guy,
and
Gabe.
we recognize, oh, it's a Texas malt, you must use live oak. Why, yes, I do. I think we need to see some of those regional definitions get a little clarified, a little crystallized. I think 10 or 20 years down the road, we may see more of that kind of categorization.
As you talk about, like, people trying to introduce people to Scotch in general, and everyone thinks about what their grandfather drank. That's like part of that challenge, right? Like, they've been around so long that they have these, major categories. that
Right.
people
And there are also,
recognize.
the newer generations are increasingly irritated by those categories, right? So when we're talking about global single malt production, we know personally a lot of distillers that are coming up through Scotland that are like, well, yeah, my distillery happens to be here, but I want to make a Highland style, even though I'm in the lowlands. Or, yeah, I might be, in Campbelltown, but I want to make something like humans love putting things into boxes, right? We love categorizing things, but we also like breaking the mold.
My point was, like, don't be afraid to lump right now
Sure.
while you're getting the.
Yes.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, and also too, like, I think we're, as producers, and communicating with our sales and marketing teams, if you have them, maybe that's you. I think we have a very particular like perspective and like a niche perspective, and so I don't want in any way, because I'll see Balcones lumped, or Westward, or whoever lumped into American whiskeys, and there's a Scotch section and a Japanese section and an Irish section. I'm like, dang, like it's annoying. Like, this is something else. But it could have been that bar knows its clientele, they know their menu, and they go, oh, Westward's getting lost at the end of the other whiskey section, so we put him here so it can be visible. That can absolutely be happening. I don't want to come off too strong. And kind of be unfair to like a bar's expertise, on-premise expertise. That being said, yeah, like I think if we could get in to the single malt section, that'd be a first step. And then as things move, having like a designated American single malt section, I think would be really helpful. But yeah, I'm just now realizing that it's not, we come in pretty hot. We're really passionate about it. And go like, we need our own thing. And it's like, well, wait, y'all also know your clientele, it could be a very different bar, than what we're envisioning.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Very gracious. All right. So we're at time. I want to thank you guys so much for sharing your time with all of us and listening to us. If you have other questions, we have all agreed to kind of hang out for a few minutes after the panel. So feel free to grab any of us with your questions that you feel like you didn't get answered. So again, thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your Tales of the Cocktail.